After 17 long years, the sequel for Tenkaichi 3 is finally here, something a lot of us thought would never happen. The Tenkaichi games were always my favorite Dragon Ball games as a child, as I felt like its combat system did the best at letting you feel like a Dragon Ball character, with its extremely mobile 3D fighting system, as well as having one of the largest rosters I had ever seen at the time. So as you can imagine, I had both high hopes and expectations when Sparking Zero was first announced, which is why I'm extremely happy to report that not just did I have a great time playing, but I also think it's a great sequel that'll leave almost nobody disappointed. I had a couple complaints, but this will certainly be a more positive review overall. So without wasting any more time, let's get into the gameplay. So if you played any of the previous Tenkaichi games, then I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that Sparking Zero plays almost exactly the same, just a bit faster paced and with the addition of a couple new mechanics, like the new perception system, and it really didn't take me long at all to get familiar with the controls because of how familiar everything felt. Sparking Zero may appear a bit button mashy at first, but the Tenkaichi games are a lot more complex than they initially appear. By pressing square, you can perform your main combo starter known as a rush attack, and during this main attack chain, you can already perform a myriad of options. By pressing triangle during a rush, you will perform a chain finisher that changes both depending on the character you're playing as, and by how many times you have already pressed square during your rush. If your opponent is guarding your rush, you can perform a high attack or a low swoop by tilting the D-pad, which then forces your opponent to guard accordingly or be hit. If you press the guard button during a rush, you can teleport behind your opponent to take them off guard and then continue your rush damage. You get the picture. Anybody who thinks Tenkaichi is a button mash fest clearly hasn't gone very deep into the combat, considering your square attack alone has over 4 different options. Of course, you can also fire range attacks using triangle, such as Ki Blast, and these Ki Blasts function differently depending on the character you are playing as. Charging these Ki Blasts causes them to do more damage, but of course also consumes more Ki. To charge Ki, you hold R2, and there really isn't much to say about this, other than that it looks really badass, and I feel like they did a great job of representing the show. The way the weather changes when a character reaches full power is a genuinely nice touch in my opinion. Each character will have a second bar underneath their health and ki known as the skill count bar, which can reach a max of 6 and gradually increases whenever a player deals or takes damage. This bar is required to charge your ki to max, which enables you to use your ultimate, and you can use your skill count bar to use a character's skill, which everyone has 2 of per form. These skills vary from character to character, but they can do things such as raise certain stats, avoid certain attacks, or even instantly give you max ki. This adds an extra layer of strategy to the combat, as each player has to decide if they want to use their skill points to transform, use an ultimate, or use a skill. There are even multiple options for defense as well other than guarding, and believe it or not, is one of the most fun and skill-based systems I've seen introduced into any fighting game. The new perception system also adds new options, which I'll explain deeper. So by holding R1, you will perform your standard guard, and this will block virtually anything outside of specific super attacks and charged attacks. By tilting your D-pad either up or down while guarding, you will perform either a high or low block, and these are required to block the mentioned attacks before, so you have to be paying attention to your opponent's rush pattern. By pressing R1 almost the millisecond your opponent attacks you, you will perform something known as a vanish, which teleports you behind your opponent, leaving them open to a counterattack. Of course, your opponent can also perform a vanish of their own if timed correctly, and this can lead to some moments almost straight from the anime when performed between 2 higher skilled players. This has always been one of my favorite mechanics in the Tenkaichi games, and I'm glad to see it returned and done justice. Doing a perfect guard can be used to counter almost any attack, even supers and grabs, so this is an essential mechanic to master. Now I'll talk about the new perception system a bit. By holding circle, you will enter a guard-like stance, and during this you cannot move. If your opponent attacks you in this state, you will perform a counter attack, allowing you a bit of breathing room. This is a good way to get your opponent off of you for a moment if they're being relentless with their attacks. Perception can be used to counter beam supers at the cost of a couple skill bars, and this is also a really cool animation. Using perception will cost you some ki unless, much like guarding, you do it the absolute moment they attack you. This will result in something known to the Tenkaichi fans as a sonic sway, and you will drain your opponent of some of their ki. You will know when this is performed when it looks like your character has suddenly mastered Ultra Instinct and begin Muhammad Ali swaying all of your opponent's attacks. Needless to say, much like the attacking, the defense mechanics also offer you multiple options to approach combat, and when mastered will leave you almost never feeling defenseless. There isn't too much to say about the super attacks other than that they look very visually impressive and are satisfying to the eye. Each form for each character will have 3, so you very rarely see the same animations on repeat, especially with Sparking Zero's massive roster. The part of this game I was most looking forward to was certainly the combat, and I was definitely skeptical when the game was first announced. But as a longtime Tenkaichi fan, it did not let me down, and I have been having a great time with online matches so far. Even things I wasn't really expecting to return, such as beam clashes, are back and just as fun as ever. So now that I've talked a bit about the main combat mechanics, I'll move on to the different game modes, starting with the story and what-ifs, since that's what the majority of players are probably going to jump into first. So I'm not going to really talk about the actual plot since it's just a retelling of the anime outside of the what-ifs, but I will talk about the overall presentation and new additions. The way you'll be playing through the story is done through an episodic retelling through different characters' perspectives. So if you're playing through Goku's story and there's a weird sudden jump, it's most likely because that part of the story is played through another character's perspective. This is fine for the most part as it gives you plenty of content and allows you to play as multiple characters, but there are certainly a couple weird decisions such as leaving Dragon Ball Super entirely out of Vegeta's story despite him playing a major role, or not including any of the movies despite having the characters playable. This isn't a big deal, but I personally wasn't a fan of the overall presentation of the story, as I feel like the devs took almost the worst route possible. What I mean by this is that the vast majority of the story is told through boring and generic still images with word boxes on the bottom. I personally don't think this would be that big of an issue if the word boxes were at least narrated like in the anime or something, because it can really result in some awkward looking scenes with rather weird transitions that can definitely take you out of it at times. And to all the people saying just go play Kakarot or the old Tenkaichi games didn't have the best story. Get what you fucking deserve! But all jokes aside, I feel like it's important to discuss all aspects of the game, whether the story is the main focus or not, since at the end of the day, this is still a AAA price game with a $30 season pass. So I want people to know what they're getting before buying. Especially since not everybody plays online, meaning a lot of players will probably only be doing offline content such as the story. And they also unfortunately removed a couple of my favorite game modes such as survival and 100-man battle. I certainly wasn't expecting Kakarot level cutscenes, but if you're gonna go this route, then some narration would go a long way. I also feel like it's not that fair to compare this to the old Tenkaichi games, considering that they are over 17 years old and on the PlayStation 2, and even 2 had an open world style hub. There is nothing wrong with expecting improvements over time. It certainly doesn't ruin the game at all, as I play these games for the combat, but I do think it's worth mentioning as it makes what could have been a really fun Dragon Ball story experience feel more like a vessel that you rush through for the sake of unlocking the characters and what-ifs. So with that out of the way, I should talk about the what-ifs as they are connected to the main story. So outside of a nitpick or two, the what-ifs were an overall great experience that I'm really glad they brought back. While the what-ifs do still suffer from the same still images, they luckily seem to be where the majority of the game's cutscene budget did go, as they're easily the most high quality scenes in the story. The map that you traverse during the story will inform you when a what-if is available by having a green arrow pointing in either direction on the corner of the mission, and these are unlocked by performing a different set of actions during the fight. These actions usually consist of beating an opponent faster, holding out a certain amount of time, or even a couple where you have to lose on purpose. The requirements are typically harder than the usual ones, so you can almost view them as a reward for better performance, and some of these are required to unlock certain characters if you don't wish to purchase them from the shop with Zenny. Some of these what-ifs are really cool and fulfill certain curiosities as a Dragon Ball fan, such as what if Goku went Super Saiyan against Vegeta in the Saiyan arc? What if Goku Black took over Gohan's body instead of Goku's? Or even what if Vegeta and Trunks beat Cell instead of Gohan? I had a great time doing these as they were presented much better over the main story, and I'm sure they might answer a couple questions for fans. With that being said though, I do have one complaint, and that's that I just wish more of these what-ifs had the same level of quality. The way the what-ifs work is that they're basically split into two categories, sparking episodes and just the basic what-ifs. The ones I mentioned previously, like Gohan Black, are the sparking episodes and have full cutscenes. The main issue to me is that each character typically only has 1 to 2 actual sparking episodes, 3 at max, while all the rest of them are typically just one-off fights that ends with a still image and what if the saga ended a bit earlier, and these do seem to be the majority of them. Goku, for example, starts off really strong with his what-ifs, but then never has another sparking episode again after the Cell saga. This isn't a deal breaker or anything, but it's just something that really stood out to me after playing through the episodes, but luckily that's where my complaints end, as clearly by the title of this video I had an overall good time. The only other things really worth talking about outside of the conclusion are the other game modes such as custom matches, PvP, and the in-game shop. So while I personally didn't play the custom matches very much so far, and not gonna lie, I'm probably not gonna create any fights, I do think it's a really good addition and will add potentially several hours of additional playtime. It's also great for creative players who want to create their own fights for others to enjoy, and kind of create your own potential what-ifs. You can add chat bubbles, force the use of certain characters, add modifiers to make the fights way harder or easier for narrative purposes, and more for the sake of creating your own story segments. Even if you don't care about the story segments, they can still be fun for the sake of gameplay, as the modifiers can provide you with extremely difficult fights, and even things such as the opponent's stats increasing every time you damage them. I'm sure many players will find hours of enjoyment from this, and while I'm still sad they removed survival as it was one of my favorite game modes, the custom battles will definitely keep me occupied in the meantime. I've been playing a good amount of the PvP, and as long as you pay attention to your opponent's connection to ensure that they have at least 4 bars, it's a relatively smooth experience with occasional dips here and there. I don't have much to add on the combat as it uses the same mechanics I spoke about before, but I will say that these mechanics work great for player versus player matches and can result in some truly fast-paced, extremely fun fights that's really hard to find in other games. I really have nothing but positives to say about the combat, and props to the devs for keeping it faithful. There is usually a very slight delay during online fights that takes a bit of readjustment for a game all about timing, but once you figure it out, you should fall back into your rhythm. PvP offers the option to create a room with multiple other players so you can have King of the Hill style matches and spectate your opponents while you await your turn. You can also send thumbs up while spectating to encourage the people fighting. It's an overall really fun system, and it always feels great when you whoop an entire lobby's ass. My personal favorite game mode is the DP battle mode, where each player makes a team out of a cost of 15, and each character costs more or less depending on how powerful they are. This also prevents people from running the most OP characters only, and forces team variety, which I personally can't praise enough, as it's a really clever way to balance a game with such a large roster. The only other thing I think I should mention outside of the conclusion is the in-game shop, as it's where you'll be spending all of your in-game currency and will give you a general idea on the customization. As you play through the game in virtually any game mode, you will slowly accumulate Zenny, which you will then take to the shop to buy things such as characters, costumes, music, buffs, etc. Not everything will be available for purchase from the beginning though, as what's available in the shop is linked to your player level up to a maximum of 20. Once you reach level 20, everything will be available for purchase. I personally didn't really need to grind for anything, nor did I really buy any of the buffs, as I didn't find them necessary for anything. After playing through the majority of the characters' episodes and doing some PvP, I was able to buy all the characters, costumes, music, and still have money to spare. So don't feel alarmed when you see the price of certain things, as Zenny is fairly quickly gained. I wish that more characters had different costumes, as only really the main characters have any options, but I wouldn't doubt if they added more in the future. At the very least though, I am also happy with having to earn things with in-game currency, and it's great that they included GT and movie characters at launch. So outside of the rather lackluster story mode and the slightly disappointing amount of quality what-ifs, I found Sparking Zero to be an otherwise perfect sequel to the Tenkaichi series, and the new additions to the combat result in an extremely smooth combat experience that can often result in fights that feel directly out of the anime. There is plenty of content here to keep you entertained for a quality amount of time, with more to come in the future. And who knows, maybe if enough people like me ask for it, they'll even bring back survival and a 100-man battle, since these devs seem to be quite receptive with community feedback. Now, would I recommend Sparking Zero? If you're a longtime fan of the Tenkaichi games, or maybe just a big fan of anime arena fighters and are looking for something new, then 100% yes. I don't think fans of the combat system will be disappointed at all, and I'm sure you'll feel right at home within a few hours. If you're a big fan of the Naruto Storm franchise or something, and are maybe feeling a little burnt out, then I don't doubt you would enjoy this game either. Now, if you've never played a Tenkaichi game before, or maybe a bit more on the fence as you're not sure if you would enjoy it, then I also don't feel like you would be wrong for waiting for a sale, since $70 is a lot of money nowadays, and there is also a $30 season pass. Although with that being said, I think if you've been eyeing it for a while, then you won't be disappointed unless you were going to buy it for the story. In terms of an anime arena fighter, I think it's a quality 8 out of 10 with only a few flaws, and it's a quality sequel. Especially when the only competition that comes anywhere close in terms of quality is Naruto Storm, with Jump Force having been dragged out the back and shot.
And I get the tender wrap.
So if you made it this far and enjoyed the review, feel free to leave a like and a sub, as I greatly appreciate it, and I plan to keep the reviews coming. And I'll see you all next time.